Hi, my name is Michael Siegel. Welcome to Nautilus Live Chat. I have with me award-winning author and journalist Jessica Siegel, who is on the faculty at the NYU School of Journalism and has written for publications including the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Salon, Washington Post, and Nautilus twice. And she joins us to talk about her latest Nautilus article, America is Getting the Science of Sun Exposure Wrong. So welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to start by asking how you got interested in the topic. Why this article now?
Well, I actually had a personal experience with a doctor who, when he reported that I actually had a deficiency of vitamin D, and now just vitamin D is a very controversial topic. So when we say deficiency, that means clinically deficient by all standards. That's been something that's been hugely debated, but this was definitely deficient. Everyone would agree. And then he told me that I should take vitamin D supplements and eat foods with vitamin D. And then I said, okay, well, should I go in the sun? And he said, no, don't go in the sun. The sun causes cancer. And I thought, how is it possible that the sun causes cancer? I've been writing about science and many other topics a long time. And I thought, well, if the sun caused cancer, humans wouldn't have evolved. We'd all be dead. So I went online and I started to really look into it. And I found out that, in fact, that is extremely erroneous, that the recommendation to eat foods to get my vitamin D was also erroneous. Foods have very low quantities of vitamin D. Only wild fish really has a good quantity of vitamin D, and also cod liver oil, but taking cod liver oil, which is how they solved this problem at the beginning of the 20th century, also has high levels of vitamin A. So I started really investigating and came up with this pretty extraordinary story about how the American medical community was getting the science of sun all wrong.
So we had a beautiful sunny weekend in New York this past weekend. Were you outside? Do you use sunscreen? Or are you with your smartphone sort of checking how long you should be outside and sort of measuring everything? Because that's a difficult thing to do.
Well, I think a really important thing about this article is that you need to know your own skin. And you need to make sure you do not burn. Out of all of the myths that are out there, that tanning itself is hazardous, that getting a tan is hazardous, it depends on your skin tone. It is absolutely crucial to never burn. All of the studies, all of the controversy about the sun and your skin type, it is extremely clear that burning is linked to melanoma and other kinds of skin cancer. So you need to really watch yourself. Now, I don't like to have the sun on my skin for a really long time because I find it uncomfortable, and I don't want to turn super dark brown because it also causes wrinkling. And the sun is also definitely related to lesser forms of skin cancer that are no fun. And those are called squamous cell and basal cell carcinoma are definitely linked to sun exposure. So I cover up when I go in the sun and I wear a big hat. In 20 minutes a day, and D-Minder will tell me how much I need. And a high summer day, I'm going to get like 5,000, 6,000 IUs of vitamin D, and that is way more than you need on a daily basis.
In just 20 minutes?
Absolutely. And on my skin tone, I'm dark-skinned for someone who is, quote, Caucasian. I mean, that's sort of the classification on the US Census form. But if you actually look at me, I'm dark. And I have always identified as someone who is darker. It's just the facts of my skin color. It's actually one of the reasons I speak Spanish. Everyone would always speak to me in Spanish here in New York City, and so I learned Spanish. I'm like, okay, let's go with that flow. And when this doctor was looking at me, he didn't see my actual skin color, which is someone who's quite dark. And so as I began to look into it, and I even started using an app called D-Minder, which will actually take a photo of your skin color, and it will tell you what is your skin type. And then it will give you a recommendation of how much sun you should get, and also how much sun you need to create the right amount of vitamin D. Now, vitamin D is created when the sun hits your skin. The body goes through a whole series of processes, including going, it has to hydroxylize, and I'm probably getting that word wrong, so don't get on me on that one. And then it turns it into actual active vitamin D. There's a circulating form, there's an active form, and it goes through the kidneys and it changes it into vitamin D. Someone with dark skin actually needs more sun to make the same amount of vitamin D as someone with light skin. So I, in terms of this, came up as a skin type 3 to 4. There's something called the Fitzgerald scale of skin colors, and it goes from 1 to 6. So 1 would be a very pale, perhaps blonde, very fair person who would burn very, very quickly. A 6 would be a sub-Saharan African who has a really velvety, deep, dark tone. So I'm right in the middle.
If I read the article and I decide to get normal sun exposure, what should I do? What does that mean?
I think normal, well, the term normal, as we know, is not a scientific term.
Right.
So maybe we could say natural, or maybe we could say in the pattern of our ancestors before the rise of modern culture brought us indoors, before we spent all day in an office indoors. So let's go back to, let's say, the pattern of people who were farmers and talk about that. And could someone say were humans farmers for that long? Or hunter-gatherers? We were hunter-gatherers certainly for longer than we were farmers. There's going to be a lot of daily sun exposure. But people evolved at certain latitudes. My ancestors did not evolve at this latitude. They came, there's a lot of travels there.
Well, none of ours did, really, right?
Exactly.
So if I work in an office and I don't see the sun, I go to work at 8 a.m. and I go home at 8 p.m. in the winter, and I go to a tanning salon because, for 20 minutes a day, half an hour a day to get some sun, is that bad? There's this contradiction there in the advice that we're getting.
Okay, now you're getting, I think, into one of the most controversial areas of the story. And it's really a whole separate topic about tanning salons. However, in looking at the research that I have seen, all of the case-controlled studies that look at tanning salons find a link between melanoma and tanning salons. Now, if you really look through the data and you say, why is that? There's a couple of things that we can pull out. First of all, people who are the highest risk for melanoma go to tanning salons. Those are the palest, whitest people. Those are the last people in the world who should ever go to a tanning salon because they often burn. Tanning salons are not well regulated. They have equipment that is not run by medical professionals. People report, and these are in large-scale longitudinal studies, that they burn in salons. And it is that burn that is always linked to cancer and to skin cancer.
So one of the most surprising facts in your article was that chronic exposure to the sun reduces your rate of melanoma. But there's a tension there because what does chronic mean? Someone like myself has sort of a binary reaction to the sun. It's either nothing or I burn.
Oh.
So if I'm trying to get chronic exposure and reduce my rates of melanoma, how do I know what's chronic? How do I know what's enough?
I think all of the experts are extremely clear that you should not go out and seek the sun in order to do anything, that tanning itself is bad. And so that's sort of the bottom line. When they say chronic sun, I think that term can be easily misinterpreted. It means on a daily, normal basis. In terms of melanoma rates, and this is science of the last 10 years, there has been a lot of cutting-edge science, a lot of it coming out of Australia. They have the highest melanoma rate in the world, 2 times anywhere else, minimum, and possibly higher in other places with low melanoma rates, but it's definitely 2 times higher than in America. And they have really forged the forefront of this science. So what the latest research is showing is that it's not sun exposure itself, it's the burns. And that having high levels of vitamin D and having regular sun exposure every day is definitely protective of melanoma. Okay, but for us who work in offices, it's hard to get daily, regular sun exposure and a natural tan. Meaning, if I go out every day, let's say I weed my garden every day for an hour, I'm going to slowly build up a natural tan. And that is going to take me through the seasons. As the sun gets hotter and hotter, the UV intensity gets hotter in the summer, in the high peak summer, that tan is going to get darker day by day by day. Okay, as the sun wanes, as winter and fall are coming, the tan is going to start to naturally fade. But that's not how we live today. We suddenly go all out on the weekend and do 3 or 4 hours, and you're going to burn.
So how do I know if I have a vitamin D deficiency? Not a severe one, but a mild one that needs attention.
Well, I found mine out by having a blood test. It's now, within the last few years, it's become part of the regular medical tool chest. This is relatively new. I hadn't had a test ever before. I'd never really heard of it.
Did you think you were sick?
No, I didn't think I was sick.
So you didn't have any problems that you were going to the doctor to address?
Yes, I did have some problems. Yes, I did. But no doctor had connected it to vitamin D deficiency.
So what do we look out for?
Okay, well, I'll tell you what my symptoms were. The one that is not contested in the medical literature is I was having weird pains on the bottom of my feet. Like my bones hurt. And I found sometimes that I wasn't walking properly. I felt that way. Now, I'd never used the term waddle. No. But, in fact, in the medical literature, as I started to investigate this, I actually saw the word waddle. And this, okay, I'm not admitting that I waddle at all, but it felt like a funny gait. Now, when I went to this very doctor and he said, do you have any issues? I said, well, my feet are hurting me. And he said, oh, you must have plantar fasciitis. Now, this guy didn't examine my feet. And he said, you should do stretching exercises for your feet. Okay, another thing, again, personally, everyone has their own level of symptoms, is that I have got adult onset asthma. Now, this is not the forefront, and that was about 3-4 years ago. This is not in the forefront of the literature. And I have to tell you that the American medical community has not examined closely the link between vitamin D and respiratory illness. However, if you go back in the literature, back to the 30s and 40s, when they were really looking at this stuff, when vitamin D deficiency was still in the forefront of people's mind, there are some case-controlled studies, especially out of Tibet, where they were giving kids there, they get like no sun there at all. They had tremendous deficiencies. They gave vitamin D, and they had a marked reduction in respiratory illness. And I have to tell you, since I have started getting sun, and supplements in the winter are absolutely crucial. Right now, we're talking to you from New York. It's latitude 43 north. In the winter, between about November and March, the sun is not high enough in the sky to give you one ray of ultraviolet sun. You will have a deficiency in the winter if you do not take supplements. So for me, the respiratory issues aren't gone entirely, but they're substantially reduced. I go mountain climbing, do things like that. I'm back to my old self. I threw away the inhalers. My feet are fine. I do not have any problem. And people who I spoke to discussed exactly the same kinds of things with these same kinds of symptoms.
If you add up where the money is in the equation, you have the sunscreen industry, and I guess also the vitamin D industry on the side of protection and staying out of the sun. But on the other side, you have nobody. Is that correct? I mean, it's free to just go out in the sun.
It's a funny thing. It's a funny thing that you mentioned. It's free to go out in the sun. So, and by the way, that is something that the Australians mentioned. They said, hey, we do not want to have recommendations, medical recommendations, that forces people to buy a supplement when they can go outside and get the sun for free. And I think that is something where the American dermatological community really needs to think about it, because they had a very controversial study that came out recently, promoted and done by their top, what they call ethnic dermatologists. These are dermatologists who deal with what they call people of color, meaning people with darker skin. The term people of color is not used in Britain. It's not necessarily used in other countries, so that is very much an American term. And they are recommending sunscreen for even the darkest people. And you have to ask, what's the monetary interest there? In order to do that, they're both promoting supplements and promoting sunscreen as part of that recommendation. Now, if you've looked at a bottle of sunscreen, you know how expensive that is to really load up on that enough that you need to go into the sun. So this could be hundreds of dollars a year, when with proper controlled sun exposure, you can get all your vitamin D for free.
I want to talk to you a bit about SPF. So I was shocked to discover that a t-shirt has SPF under 10 and a wet t-shirt is under 5. And when you go to the drugstore, you see 70. So that's like wearing a half dozen or a dozen t-shirts. What's going on with SPFs? Where will the numbers stop? And what SPF do you buy?
That is a really tough question. for people. SPF means sun protection factor. All I can do is respond to what I have found in my research. I did not research SPF, however, and looking at many, many dozens of medical studies, most of which did not make it into this story. This is just the very thin tip of the iceberg. There is a lot of controversy about sunscreens, lotions that are marked SPF. Okay, I will only tell you that what I do is I wear a hat and long sleeves. That's what I do. I do not trust sunscreens. However, when I am going out for a full day of hiking, which I do often, I do put it on my face and I do put it on my hands.
What do you mean you don't trust sunscreens? You don't think they'll work?
I want to go back to what is a more natural relationship to the sun. Okay, the fact is that in America, for many years, they only had UVB protection in sunscreens. Okay, so that's the ultraviolet B. That is a particular wavelength. They did not have UVA. So the actual facts of what happened was people didn't burn, and they went and spent way more time in the sun than they would have been able to do naturally without anything on their skin. Now, I happened to be in a diner yesterday, and I saw a woman with so many wrinkles on her face that I was startled. I was like, how can someone have so many wrinkles on their face? Well, I have to tell you, it's something that has been noted in the medical literature because UVA causes those wrinkles. And this extraordinarily wrinkled face that you're seeing, there are people who believe, scientists who've written about that, believe that that is a result of a couple of decades of sunscreen that only had UVB, prevented people from burning, and they then spent hours and hours in the sun, which is more than is healthy, way more than is healthy. So if you're, to me, you should be really using a hat. In Australia, I want to tell you, the country that is absolutely at the forefront of sun protection, a hat is now part of their children's school uniform. Those kids in the summer, in their summer, are not allowed outside without a hat on. And that's absolutely a good policy. They also use a lot of sunscreens.
Well, thanks very much for the article. I mean, you did, I think, a great service to people who read it, and I encourage readers to go to the comment section where you're participating and answering questions and ask a question, put a comment in. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much. I really want to thank Nautilus. It's such tremendous editing. My editor, Alina Zeldovich, and you, Michael Siegel, really just a fantastic teamwork, and I appreciate it so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks.